The reason we're all here tonight is for our guest, Amy Rockett Todd. And Amy explores the relationship between the hand and technology through the use of alternative process photography, specifically wet plate. And something I really love about Amy's work is the sculptural work, which draws on her background in architecture. So I'm really excited to see her presentation and hear her talking about her work and her process. And also, I think you're going to talk a little bit about quote unquote failures and the lessons that can be learned from them. So that's also very exciting. So we're going to jump right into the screen share of Amy's presentation.
Well, thanks to everybody for being here tonight. And thank you to Dale and the Halide Project for hosting me. I'm excited to talk about my work tonight. I'm excited to talk about process and also like when things can go wrong. And I've also interviewed a couple of artists that I'm going to talk about because it's nice to have a little bit of background information on like how do other people deal with, when things happen and they need to troubleshoot or they need to overcome a failure. So, just a little bit about myself as an artist. My background is in interior architecture and design and studio art through the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. And I've worked at a couple of architecture firms early on and started my own business doing architectural renderings for about 5 years. And then I decided to move on into signage design and theme casino signage and resort signage. So that kind of brought the combination of architecture, design, and art kind of all together. And that really was my jumping off point for reconnecting with the creative process in photography. So I decided at some point that I wanted to create my own camera. So I got into pinhole photography and really enjoyed the slow process of the pinhole work and found out through research that wet plate collodion had a lot of the same or similar aspects in terms of seeing that slow movement and capturing that slow movement that I was intrigued with. So I learned wet plate from Jill Enfield at the Main Media workshops in college in Rockport. And then I took a refresher weekend recently. So there was a 10-year span or 10 or 12-year span between when I learned and just a little refresher weekend that I spent in the Sonoran Desert with David Emmett Adams and Joni Sternbach. And that workshop was through Medium Photo. So that was recent. And it was nice just to kind of revisit, especially on location and field work, being outside the studio. So that was nice. I also studied image collage and painting and that combination with Holly Roberts at the Anderson Arts Ranch. And then also glass printmaking and fusing with Carrie Iverson and Jeremy Skidmore, and that was through the Pittsburgh Glass Center. Um, so basically, that's a little bit about what like brings all of that together into my photo work and my creative work. I do have my own studio practice. I don't really focus a lot on commission work. I do like to put together projects that are more conceptual and more symbolic for not just storytelling, but kind of an arc of our existence, really. I know that sounds a little broad, but I think as photographers, capturing images in our life is it's a wonderful medium to use photography since its birth and how it captures life in general. So I'm excited to move on and talk about some of the photo sculpture work that I've done in the past, and talk about, I know a lot of people have seen um, the images possibly on social media, but we don't really, unless you're in a place where you can see the exhibit, it's really difficult to reach out to others in terms of the backstory. And I love backstories. Backstories kind of run why I do things. So if we want to just go ahead and jump into the first image. So this slide just is basic in talking about what Dale had mentioned earlier about what that portfolio is about. Manus being the Latin term for hand, or of the hand, because everything in wet plate collodion has the hand involved with it. It's, you think of modern photography and then you think of traditional photo processes, and they're so different in terms of how much personal touch, how much personal process goes into each piece. So each piece that I create is based off of an architectural building or site. And I analyze the design of that site, and those aesthetics and the structure become reflected in the way the art piece is either photographed, designed, or created. So this first piece is called Abundant Life. And it's a small piece. It actually, I mean, well, it's large, but it's based off of 2.5 inch triangles. And so together they create an overall size of roughly 15 by 20. They're 46 triangle tintype pieces, and they're all mounted. Well, I say all, that some of them are mounted to an acrylic substrate that creates kind of this undulation or relief pattern. And this is actually created from a building that I analyzed from the Oral Roberts Ministry. And you can see that building right there with the little diamond shapes. They're falling off the building. It became a real eyesore. It was an abandoned building. And so you see that kind of three-dimensional, and the fact that they were falling off, kind of pieces and parts of my sculpture work are missing. Like they're absent portions of it. Um, but there's a hand painted accent on one or two of them, and that's in gold. Mostly because Oral Roberts is said to have been colorblind, and the only color he could actually see was gold, even though a lot of people think he liked gold for the riches. And on that building, so a lot of the pieces look abstract, but you saw from the building, like there are pieces and parts that I took digitally and was able to then manipulate those and use Pictorico film and go back into the darkroom and do contact printing with the wet plate process. And so that's how you get those different modern or almost tribal looking designs to the piece. And you can see, like, this is an example of one of the pieces kind of blown up before it was applied to a triangle tintype, and it has the word waste on it. And I found it interesting that building, it's a 7-story building that housed a ministry, and it had no windows, and the word waste was actually written on the donation box on the outside of the building. So there's a lot of interesting symbolism stuff going on there with that piece. And you just kind of, it's almost like a puzzle the way that it was put together. And you just kind of go through, and you have your own little Where's Waldo moments with this piece. But you can see there in the image to the right that there's a relief design using those custom acrylic wedge pieces. And so that piece, before being the 2.5 inch triangles, it was more of a prototype piece. Like, how can I make this bigger? How can I make it be a wall piece or an installation piece? And so a couple years later, 3 to be exact, I figured out a way to create this. I abandoned the the wedge, and I created this kind of undulation of diamond shapes, and each diamond is going to be 10 inches by 20 inches, and each diamond consists of two 8 by 10 triangles. There are a couple of mirrored pieces in this arrangement, and there's maybe 8 or 9 that I've screen printed on top of that. So there are some screen prints on top of mirror and screen prints on top of tintypes. Excuse me. Okay, moving on. If you'll just excuse me for a minute. Dry throat. So this is the Adams Cube. It's based off of a building in Tulsa that has these terracotta tiles. Mostly the star pattern is all around the eye level of the entire building. So this building is the Adams Minx Hotel in downtown Tulsa. The building at one point was um, in the process of they were trying to figure out, do we save the building? Do we revamp the building? Do we tear down the building? So it just became one of those buildings that was so beautiful that I wanted to create almost like a jewelry box. And also I wanted to create these ambrotypes that are clear. You can see all the way through them, and they become very dainty or lace-like, almost like jewels. So I wanted to create this piece that presented in a way that, when you think about the presentation of it, plus the fact that this building was a historic building and, is a gem worthy of being preserved. And so that's the idea behind presenting this in its own little box. And you can see there the building, and then the actual tile, the star tile that's at eye level around the entire building. And just a little bit about the design process for like what goes into the design for a sculpture piece. Um, there, sorry. There is the sculptural symbolism. So I do derive that from the building itself. Then there's the digital photo work. Then there's the wet plate contact printing in darkroom. But I also use a process online called SketchUp, and I will create models of what the size, what the dimension, kind of how this all needs to fit together, which is very important to me, just coming from a design background, in terms of making sure this all comes together not only in a beautiful, creative way, but in a way that looks professional. So this piece is called Tower. It is based off of the Frank Lloyd Wright's Price Tower in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And you see there, it's another three-dimensional piece that's wall mounted on an acrylic substrate. And there are 8 sections, and those 8 sections are symbolic of the 8 residential balconies on this building. And on one side, which is the right side, that's kind of in shadow, you can see there are the abstracted forms, much like what was on the triangular or the diamond piece, also taken like digitally from the site. But what is shown on the left side are abstracted forms of ginkgo leaves. And Frank Lloyd Wright, he had one of his beloved trees was a ginkgo tree, and his home and studio was built around one of these beautiful trees. So I wanted to give that kind of organic homage to Frank Lloyd Wright in this piece. Oh, and also the form on this is based off of a 30-60-90 triangle, which he used as the structure building when he planned out that Price Tower. So again, you can see the Price Tower building and kind of those sections and see where, symbolically I kind of pulled from that aesthetically from the building. And then also just a blow up of what one of those panels of the ginkgo leaf looks like. And again, with a little bit of design process background, you see a SketchUp model on the left side, and on the right side, you see um, how that looks in process and how I was laying it out. I always think it's interesting to see the behind the scenes. Moving on to what I call light bars. There are three individual light bars. I also have two or three that are still in process. They're unfinished, but I can definitely add to this selection. But these three are, oh, let's see, 2.5 inch by 4 inch by 48 inches tall, and they're internally lit by LED lights. For this presentation, we actually had a movable wall within the gallery space. So we were able to move the wall out, drill a hole in the bottom where the light bar LED strips go into the wall. So they're applied to the wall with hidden connections electrically. And we were able to just plug them in, move the wall back into place. So it created this nice seamless um, display. But each of the light bars contains 57 tintypes. And again, they're printed in the darkroom with the Pictorico film. And I went around for each light bar contains those 57 images drawn from a specific location. So, like the first one's called Fragile Level. The second one's called Vault Codes, and it's from a bank. The last one's called Ground Repair. So it's, images from like broken up ground and, foundation issues. So they're all, again, dealing with pieces and parts of architecture. And you can see I was driving down the road and my mind does not stop. It just keeps like, I'm stopped at a stoplight and I see this construction site and I see this like repetition of beams. And I see the light hitting one side of it, and then the other side is in complete shadow. And I had to snap a picture of it, and that's where the light bars were born from. So even while I'm out driving, I'm catching glimpses of what I can create later. But there on the right, you can see how they were presented within the gallery space. Again, with the design process, you can see one of those 2.5 by 2.5 inch tiles with handwriting that came from a piece or a part of the site. And then you can also see the SketchUp model to the left of what I thought it might look like, or if what would happen if I added, color to the light bars. I ended up just going with white, making it very modern and clean line and extending the height of them. But there you can see are the original five when I first thought of the number of how many I would make. This piece is actually in the process right now. This piece is based off of the Montessori Pink Tower. Again, just going right back to the fundamental original baseline for architecture. And one of the first structures for building that are presented to young students that are anywhere from age 2 to 5, they get to interact with this pink tower and how it's arranged. They get to arrange it however they want. They get to discover. It's really their first hands-on experience with a built structure of some sort. It does have mathematical background as well. So there's that combination of just the beginning formations for education for Montessorians. And Montessori, if you're aware of the history of it, it's a very hands-on process for learning. which of course I'm very drawn to because I love, you know, all things analog and all things handmade. So, just to give you guys, like, again, this is a SketchUp model of what this may look like. And again, the hands-on factor. Um, for how we interact with buildings, environments, anything in front of us, really. So in the Monas portfolio, I decided to create a subset. And because I ended up taking way too many photographs, I mean, when you look at the structures, yeah, some of them have 57 pieces to them. So, you know what my iPhone looks like. It's got a lot of pictures, you know, over and over of about, you know, if you look at one of them, it may be meaningless, but if you look at 57 of them on a photo sculpture, all of a sudden you have a story. So in taking all of those photos, I saw this thread of images that I didn't really want to abandon, but I felt like they needed a voice, and I didn't want to put them on a structure. I wanted them to speak just one at a time. So I created these 5-inch by 5-inch opaque black ambrotypes for pieces of those sites that look like we as humans have been in that space, in that site, in that building, on that land, and we have left. And what have we left? And so these are images of what we've left. And just reading through top left to right, and then bottom left to right. Support, hold ground, remember, overwash. Steps, shadow line, great, root. Free, immerse, mark, bomb. And during that exhibit, with the subset pieces and the sculpture photos, um, we also set up an interactive where I would come in every weekend and do a demo for the wet plate process. But I also set up these architectural elements that you might find at a job site, or just materials that you may find on the interior of a building, or leftover wooden pieces or bricks or concrete blocks. And so the visitors could arrange them however they wanted to. They could even incorporate their own hand into it. But they would make the setup, and then they would get to see the process happen, the photo process, from start to finish. And these were 8 by 10. And we had these ledges that were mounted to walls within the space. And so each weekend we added about four, I think, for each weekend. And we had like several weekends in a row. So we filled a wall with these. And it was interesting to see that, you know, the grouping and what people would make from it. And it also gave them the hands-on to see how the photo process worked. So it became a very nice interactive piece to the overall exhibit. All right, so I'm going to move into portraiture because while I do the photo sculpture pieces, I also try to keep another portion of my brain working in a different way. And I like to connect to people. So, you know, I'm shooting portraits from time to time. I actually do not typically like to do commission work. I like to work with artists, and I love to create an environmental portrait, or a portrait that speaks to who they are inside, not outside. So, in saying that, let's move forward. So to start with, this is a family shot of my family, and I am the dark box. So this was the very first studio that I moved into, and it was in a school building that had been revamped to be apartments. So I took one of the apartments, and it was my studio for a solid year. And I was testing out the light. We had light from one wall all the way to the other wall, and it was like, I don't know, 20 or 30 feet long. So I was testing out the light, and that's basically our little family portrait there. This piece was created to really see like how in depth the texture could go for wet plate. Like, I mean, there's a portrait, wet plate creates this softness to the skin. Sometimes it can be, it just depends. But sometimes it can be quite revealing in terms of pores. But yeah, just to put this screen in front of the model and see like how that transparency or how that detail works. It was an experiment and I really liked where it went. And this particular model was kind of in a transition period in her life, and I felt like the screen being half, you know, obscured, kind of told where she was in her life. Some photos don't really need to be explained. I think I think portraits in general tell a story, and I hope that mine tell the story. But it's a very tells a lot about the person and um, captures a mood. This actually is my husband. He walked into the studio one day and said I wasn't photographing him enough. And he sat there, grabbed a frame, and said, "Shoot it." And I did. And I was amazed that he sat there for 15 seconds holding that frame with no brace. And he just came in, we took the photo, and he left. So, yeah, that's I photographed my husband and he walked out the door. So, this one, again, my models kind of find things, bring them, and it works out from um, almost in a serendipitous way. Sometimes the sitting evolves, and you have no idea where it's going to start and where it will end. These actually are my two children, and I think it says a lot about their personality. I could talk a lot about this photo, but I think the image says everything you need to know. And this was a fashion designer who reached out to me from LA, and she was going to be in Tulsa, and she designed this piece with all of the fringe. And in LA at the time, fringe was new and in, and was like a hot thing. And she comes to Tulsa where we have fringe everywhere. And it was, she really wanted to show this off. And I think we accomplished it in a very modern way. But I just found it very interesting that she came to Tulsa to have the photos of the fringe made. Um, and we see it every day, every day. And, this is an image, I will say it's not finished. We, the sitter and I tried to work on a concept together, and I think it stands as a nice image as its own. But this is about the time that I started getting into using multiple panels for portrait work. And I feel like there are two more panels that need to be made. Um, but I think it's also strong, of her holding these roots, who were symbolic of her parents. And this is one of those images that just shows that you don't necessarily have to have the whole person to then still have a portrait. This is a very interesting backstory on this one. The gallery that I now work at, 108 Contemporary, one of their earlier shows was a yarn bombing on the outside of the building where these knitting groups would come together for months on end to create this um, almost this landscape in the green and blue, the sky and the land. And they basically hung it over the entire building. And it became the building's cladding for over 2 months. But this was the originator of that project, and that is herself. Well, that's her portrait um, of her creating this yarn bomb. Now this one's called the Wanderer, and I didn't know what I was doing. I set up on site to shoot some alleyways in Tulsa, and I saw this, you never know what's going to happen. So I was in the alleyway, um, no real idea of what's going to happen. I see this chair that's been put out with all these dumpsters. So I wheeled the chair into the center of the alleyway and just again was messing around trying to figure out, well, what does that mean? And then this guy walks by and he walks by a little bit and he's antsy and I'm antsy. And he finally asked me he's trying to get a cigarette off of me or something. And I said, no, but could I just use you for a photograph? And he said, well, I don't want to be in any photographs. And I said, that's fine, just your hand. And so we talked a little bit more. He agreed. It turned out to be this image, and I love it. I absolutely love it. I still don't know what it says. I think it's one of those that you get to figure out what it says. But after we shot it, I asked him, I was like, have you ever been a model before? And he said, yes, actually, this is not my first time modeling. I was a model when I was a baby. My parents they lived in California. And he said, my parents put me in one of those diaper commercials. So that was his very first modeling experience. And this was his second. So I ended up giving him some money for the cigarettes that he was looking for. Sometimes portraits don't necessarily need to have the person in them. These are actually portraits of my parents after they passed. So my mom's portrait is on the left, my dad's portrait is on the right, and she was a seamstress and he was a marksman, among other things for both of them. And these are all objects from when we were going through the house. They're very sentimental. And sometimes you have to take portraits of old bananas. So when I was getting into the multi-panel, when we're going to start talking about failures here in a minute. Um, this one was designed based off of the portrait sitter's personality. She was very animated with her hands, very animated in many ways. And I was like, oh, we have to capture that. And again, with the slow movement and the kind of ghostly qualities of pinhole and or wet plate. But then I wanted to create, I mean, because she had these hands and arms that were going everywhere. They were very expressive. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to do this and just see what happens. So after, a whole afternoon of experimentation, she became Durga, the Hindu goddess. Again, another multi-panel. This is from an artist, or a portrait of an artist here in Tulsa. She, at the time, was really dealing with symbolic representation of what home means. And so the center portrait is she had this house structure that she had either found or made. She made many house structures. But then also we took red lipstick and created the picket fence on her arms. And this became home. And then at the same time, she was also doing commission work where she would do these Victorian lover's eyes. And she would just do, an eyeball or an eye shape with the eyebrow in these beautiful color pencils, and it was so intricate. And so we actually commissioned her to do a family portrait in these eyes. And then we had I thought, well, I'm going to try this. Like, do you have these other eyes? And, we ended up printing them off, cutting them in different sizes, and placing them on multiple layers of plexiglass. And she held them either in front of her, or I had an assistant holding the ones on the other side. And then we actually put some on her back on that piece. But these are her portraits with no digital manipulation whatsoever. It was just, we created that on her front porch. And a neat little side story to that is the four eye portraits that she did for my family are in this piece. So, when we talk about doing wet play collodion, wet play collodion itself has 5 different recipes: collodion, silver, developer, and I will say 6, stop bath, but stop bath's water, so back to 5, fix, and then varnish. So within each of those recipes, um, there's all the variables. There's all the recipe makeup for each one of those, where something could go wrong. And I'm trying to say, uh, let's just add more variables. So we add a person. So that's, in doing portrait work. If you go on to the next slide, you can see, we've got an extra variable, a person, but then when all the chemistry stuff starts to go wrong, then we got to start troubleshooting. This is an emulsion lift off of the glass, and it was beautiful. The shot was gorgeous. I swear I almost cried. If I may have cried. It was just a really sad thing. And instead of like scraping it off and reshooting, which we reshot anyway, I decided, okay, at the last minute, we scrambled around. I said, I need some paper. I need a tub of water. And we ended up trying an emulsion lift. And, sometimes you have to try what you can to save an image. And you'll see that in the next slide. So, I mean, it could have been in the trash, but I kind of like it. We ended up reshooting more anyway, which you see there to the right. I'm not sure which one I like better. But just if something goes wrong, just keep trying, just keep doing it, keep shooting. Lift that emulsion off and try that. If that doesn't work, clean your plate really good and do an albumin or the egg white on your plates. Let that dry, and it'll hold the collodion right to the plate. So another one, that particular day, there was something like the details were getting lost. It was the exposure was not quite right, and then I also started noticing a slight light leak in the corner of my camera, which was on where where the film holder entered the back of the camera. And all these troubleshooting things were happening on this particular day, and my model was not going to be in the studio again. She's in Dallas. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to the image isn't bad, but I see a lot going on that I wanted to fix. So, take some digital shots. You can always use Pictorico film and go back into the darkroom and do a contact print. It's not as like glamorous as shooting directly in the camera, but you still get the job done. Um, so that's what happened here. And then, sometimes we get a little burst of what looks like silver on the edges of our plate. And it's caused by a dirty or contaminated film holder. Um, I'm not necessarily sure that I dislike it. I think it's wonderful. But I just like love to celebrate the bursts of silver. So I know how to fix it, but sometimes I don't want to fix it. All right, so let's get right into how do creatives deal with failure. We can jump right in. All right, so the first one, I interviewed my own husband, who is a watercolor painter and an architect, and he said, "I'm just going to keep it simple. There are three things that really gets to him, um, and they are failure by not doing, failure by bending to market factors, be true to yourself, be true to your vision, failure in not being a master of your own craft." So, get in there, dig in there, make all the mistakes you can so that you can become the master of your own craft. Also, the gallery that I work at, 108 Contemporary, our current exhibitor is a ceramic artist named Clayton Kies. And I talked with him, and he was very, very helpful in understanding. He comes from a background of teaching, so he has a great understanding of failure and how to talk to students about failure. And of course, he loves quotes. There were two quotes that he loved. The first was "The greatest teacher failure is" by Yoda. And basically, since he's a ceramic artist, he just said the material itself will cause failure. Like it's just a part of the process. He actually was creating some like animal forms for the current show, and he said there was an owl that he was creating, and it blew up in the kiln 3 times. So he had to recreate that owl 3 times. Of course, he had several instances of how he had to start over. But he just basically says it's a part of the process. Expect it, learn from it. Um, you either need to change your approach or abandon what it is that you're trying to do, because it's obvious. If it had blown up like 4 times, um, maybe that's the number for abandonment. But he still had the owl in the show. The other quote is "ever tried, ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better" by Samuel Beckett. And Clayton actually, because he's a teacher, he had led a higher ed workshop where it's called Men Like a Master. And he actually has students who make a piece, they have to tear it apart and then put it back together, either repair it or fix it without making it all over again. You can make pieces and parts, but basically you have to mend what you've made. So it basically promotes failure for you to learn from. And I thought that was a wonderful workshop idea. And the third artist is Rebecca Sexton Larson. She's a visual storyteller and photographer and wonderful artist. She combines painting with photography and imagery from her family and from history. And she basically says failures can be caused by materials that she's experienced that are no longer available. And she used to work very large with her large paper sizes, and then they stopped making it. So she started sewing pages together, which created more and more of this kind of modular aspect with her image making. She just basically said, you need to adapt to the changes. And then she's also, concerned that AI is going to present its own new challenges coming up pretty soon in the creative field. So we have to adapt in an ongoing way in the creative field. And here's another example from Rebecca's photo and painting work. Here's a before and after. That she deemed this as her own personal failure, that she wasn't quite happy with the way that the first image looked, and she needed to change perspective. So she said sometimes you just need to step away from the image or the piece that you're working on, and just look at it with a fresh set of eyes later on. But also, mistakes necessarily don't need to be endings, but sparks for learning, growth, or innovation. And what some people see as maybe a mistake may be beautiful to someone else. So, our culture teaches us that success is the goal, but we need to rethink about that and possibly redefine what success means to you. All right, so I'm going to move on to current projects. I know everyone wants to see what's on the table or what's in the dark room or, what's going on. So I'm a little uncomfortable sharing the finished pieces before a show is like set in stone. So I do want to share that it's a little bit of a departure from the past photo sculpture work. I actually have been taking photographs which we all do, over the last decade, and I'm like, where's the thread? What ties these images together? How am I going to make this sing as a unified body of work? And I didn't see the thread for years and years and years. And again, it just comes to show that sometimes you need to step away. You need to put it away. It's not necessarily a failure or a mistake. It's a beautiful thing, but you don't know what to do with it. And perhaps the thread will show itself later. And that's kind of what's happened to me. You can go to the next slide. So um, I'm just going to give you little visual hints. I'm not going to say what it is or what it isn't. Um, but basically, the shift is a more personal approach to image making. In the photo sculptures, I basically allowed myself to be analytic about looking at architecture, looking at structure, looking at our environment. And I kept my personal thought process out of it. I just wanted to show what was there. I wanted to create a structure. I wanted to create what I saw, but in a different way. So this new work embeds a lot more personal storyline and a lot more of a sensitive way of looking at things. So I'm also changing some of my materials and my photographic approach. There will be a mesh of materials and processes, including not only traditional photography, but digital media and also printmaking on fused glass. And again, here's a couple of snippets and an old photo, but it's not necessarily old to me. It was actually the birth of this thread that I'm talking about. It's the birth of the way that I want to look at the new work. So there are symbolic threads that include historic patterns and textiles and fabrics, and the flow of water in relation to time, and also various transparencies of existence combined with what we leave behind. So there is a little bit of connection with that Manus Absum, where we inhabit a space and then we leave that space. So I'm just giving you a little bit of concept, and not much to hold on to. But if you'll look at the next slide, since we creatives continue to push limits, I expect failures along the way. And here's the kicker, maybe even abandonment. So don't hold me to what I just said about the current project. It may come together and I may love it or I may not love it. No matter, try again, fail better. And thank you so much, Dale, for hosting me. And
Wow.
I hope some of that made sense.
I'm really excited to see the new work, or maybe not. Do you have, but I hope you don't, but whatever your path, great.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, I feel like that was a tour de force and we saw a lot of stuff and I know there are questions because I know some people have already started
Okay.
throwing them into the chat. So, if I miss anything that was earlier on, I know Jackie had a couple questions. She was curious as to why, with that piece where the emulsion lifted off of the glass in that ambrotype, like why that may have happened.
Oh, well, that happened because I'm not very good at cleaning my glass. And secondly, I had not used the egg white mixture around the edges, or you can even like add that to the whole plate, because it was a 10 or an 8 by 10, on red glass. Um, let's see what else. I also was using collodion that was mixed. It was one of my old collodion bottles and it was getting down to the very bottom. And sometimes I know that some people say you're supposed to pour it into a pour off bottle. I just use my regular bottle. So when I get to the bottom, all that sediment kind of pulls together on that emulsion and it wants to lift even more so. So that's what was going on with all of that. There were three different factors. But the first one, which is an obvious one, is clean your plate and use the egg white around the edges so that it helps the emulsion adhere.
As a follow-up question, Jackie is wondering if there's a way to refresh the collodion.
Um, You can mix new collodion that you've mixed with old collodion, but it just depends on the age of that old collodion. It will make the new collodion slower, but sometimes you also get a shift in the color from like I said before, like the variables are so many. Like we could go into, you know, the chemistry later. That would be a whole nother, that would be actually a workshop. Um, but yeah, if you mix old and new, you're going to be mixing um your exposure times, you're going to be mixing kind of the way that the collodion and the silver are rendered together because you will get a warmer tone or a more silvery tone. So it just yes, you can refresh, but there are a ton of variables, and that's a really heavy question.
Um, Maybe this question will not be quite so heavy.
Okay.
Jackie's also wondering how you make contact prints with the wet plate.
Yes.
Are you doing contact prints? Actually, this is a follow-up question from me. Or are you enlarging?
Oh, you can do both. You can definitely do both. You can put that negative in there and enlarge, and work on it that way. Or and you can do that with your Pictorico film and your printer and print that out. Or you can just print it out to size. Like for me, I'm only using it up to 8 by 10. So like an 8.5 by 11 printer. You can print on that Pictorico film because it's typically an 8.5 by 11 sheet size. But then the collodion on your plate is wet, so that Pictorico film just kind of, you know, goes on top of that, and your negative will not be reused. It's a one-time negative, but basically you just turn the darkroom I'm sorry, the enlarger on for the light purpose, just to give your light exposure.
Yeah, I would say, Jackie, if you saw our last show that just came down, Fractured Lands, Ella's wet plate work was done in the dark room using an enlarger. So I don't know if you saw that show or not, but we have some not questions but comments. And I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly what pieces people are referring to, but beautiful and wonderful.
Oh,
And
thank you.
um, the adaptations are brilliant and inspiring. I think that was when you were talking about, um, other people's responses to failure and how they approach that. Uh,
Yes.
Melissa says, fantastic presentation. Thank you. Lovely work and excited to see what may or may not come next. Um,
Gotta keep you on your toes. I
Ju-
keep myself on my toes, so there.
Julia particularly loved the jewelry box piece based on the building in Tulsa. And yes, Linda is saying thank you for sharing and that she really enjoyed the sculptural pieces.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I love those. The sculptural work. And it was very like interesting to see your like production images and kind of behind the scenes and your SketchUp plans and all of that to see what exactly goes into like putting together those sculptural pieces. So thank you for sharing.
Mhm. Yeah. I always
And
find it interesting to see, the backstory or the background or like the process. That to me is equally important, I think.
yeah, 'cause I feel like it can be daunting to see something and think, oh my gosh, how did that person make that? And I mean, maybe some people like to keep that a secret, but I think it can help make things a little less daunting and maybe a little more approachable for people who might be interested in exploring that kind of work. So I think that
Mhm.
was great to share.
Yeah.
If anybody has any other questions or comments, you could go ahead and put them in the chat now. And I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and especially, obviously, thank you very much, Amy, for sharing your work and your potential future work. Uh, yes. Do you have like a future show in mind that you're creating work for or something scheduled that we can kind of keep an eye out for, or are
It
you just
is
kind of
it
working?
is not scheduled. However, I do have one like in focus. For it's going to be a while because like I said, I am using multiple different medias, and the addition of the digital media may possibly be a multi-screen piece with, film that some including some of that water movement that I had mentioned. So that's going to be kind of a learning curve. And then also creating the fused work pieces. I'm expecting some failures with that as well. So it's just going to take time, but I really am going to allow myself the amount of time it takes to like enjoy those learning curves.
Awesome. Great. All right. One last minute comment from Melanie. She appreciates how positive you are about the twists and turns of your creative process and that your pieces are inspiring. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing. Thank you everyone for sharing and coming tonight. And thank you again, Amy. And just a reminder that our next speaker will be December 6th, and it will be our guest juror for this year's Living Image, Stieg Marlin Weston. So if you're interested in hearing about how people approach jurying and curating, like more broadly, but also specific to the show he put together for us that opens on December 6th, join us on December 8th. All right.
Thank you so
Thanks again.
much.
All right. Good night, everyone.